Right, today I'm looking at mixing up a top dressing for these trees and pots. Now, they should really get this in the autumn and again in the spring. Now, I might be slightly late to do this year, but this is the remains of last year's top dressing. Now, Thomas Rivers made a top dressing, which I think, if I remember rightly, was a mixture of fresh horse manure and wood ash. And the reason he used fresh horse manure, I think, was because if you gather up horse manure off a field, it's going to have the little egg capsules of brandling worms in it. And when you put that onto soil and water it in a warm condition, the little worms hatch out, and the worms make the compost out of the horse manure almost in real time in the pot. So what I think he was doing was actually quite clever, although he doesn't actually specifically say that. But he talks about the horse manure being consumed by the roots. Now, it can't really be consumed by the roots. But you can almost see why, why you might come to that conclusion, because this is a crust of last year's mixture. Now, I can't remember what this was made out of. I think this was made out of compost and wood ash. But what seems to be happening is that the roots, the little fibrous roots of the tree, and I think this is a plum. I think this is a Victoria plum. The fibrous roots seem to rise up to the surface and fill. Well, they seem to be living off of it. They seem to be coming to the surface. They realise that there's food here or something that they can use, and they come up to the surface and get the benefit of it. Now, can we see if there's anything under this? Apart from wood lice, there's many wood lice, which is quite good because it shows that it's obviously a happy place for wood lice to live. And there's all sorts of bits and pieces in there, bits of eggshell and stuff like that. But it looks like, oops, sorry, not wood lice. It looks like things are happy in there, and the roots are certainly happy to grow up through that. So this seems to be quite an effective way to provide the plant with almost like a living compost, which is almost made in real time, as it were, throughout the year. So what I'm going to be doing, and that's, again, this is last year's one, which has disappeared to dust, really. Looking for some roots. Can we find some roots? Yeah, there's a lot of roots. In fact, as you can see, because it's a compost heap, there's all sorts of rubbish gets left behind in the compost, which ideally you would take out. That looks like a knob of a piece of furniture. Bizarre, I know. Honestly, I didn't plant that there. That's just been left behind in the compost. So, and there's the fibrous roots coming up to the surface to completely fill the pot. So, I'm going to show you how I make that up. So this is about half a tub of compost. Now this is several years old, so it comes through a couple of compost bins. A first year's bin, and then it gets turned into a second year bin, and the second year bin then gets turned into a sort of holding bin with a lid on it. It's in contact with the ground, but it's covered It's got air holes at the top, but it's covered from air. So that's the remains of the compost, and there's one or two bits of rubbish in there, a little bit of a plastic bag, I don't want that. One or two little bits of some kind of horticultural fleece, or maybe some kind of tea bag or something. Eggshell. We like eggshell in the mixture, quite a lot of eggshell, because another bit of a plastic bag, don't want that. Because Thomas Rivers talks about adding lime, the rubble from an old wall, or chalk, if you could get chalk, finely powdered chalk, because he reckoned chalk was quite important for stone fruit. Now I attempted to add some lime rubble to this a few years ago, to a previous mixture, but it was far too new. When he's talking about lime off an old wall, he's really talking about a lime off a wall that's hundreds of years old and has completely converted itself back into chalk, basically, back into calcium carbonate, and there's no actual lime in it. What's that? Don't want that in it. Somebody's indigestion mixture. So that's the compost. Obviously, if there's any insects in there, we don't really want them in it, so we can go elsewhere. To that sort of quantity, I'm going to add a couple of scoops of bone meal. Now these are chicken bones and lamb bones, which have been dried off in the oven, and I'll just save these up and I'll just grind them down. Seems a bit of a waste to chuck them out. They wouldn't have been chucked out in Thomas Rivers' day. They would have been used. So I'll grind them up. I'll just smash them up with a hammer. And this is some wood ash. Now I burn garden refuse and other clean bits of unpainted, unvarnished wood. Burn that up in an old iron barrel, like a 45 gallon drum. So this is the ash that yields from that. Now, when the barrel gets old, there's iron flakes come off the barrel because it sits outside, gets a bit rusty. So there's iron flakes in there. Now I don't mind the iron flakes at all, because when these trees grow in pots, and Thomas Rivers talks about this as well, they go quite iron deficient. Now that's probably because he was using so much lime in his mixture. The pH was all messed up, and they couldn't get enough iron. So he talks about watering them with sulphate of iron. But I found that actually, if you can include, almost rough iron, possibly even nails or pieces of iron in the mixture, and just add that on the surface, that virtually cures the problem. So you don't need to add doses of iron sulphate to the mixture. So to that amount of compost, I'll probably add a couple of scoops of that, that size of scoop kind of thing. I'll add a couple of scoops of that, and then a couple of scoops of wood ash, and then mix the whole lot into a paste. So let's see how I get on with that. Okay, compost. Bones. I'll add another scoop of bones. Thomas Rivers talked about half-inch bones. Presumably that's bones that would pass through a half-inch sieve. But I've just smashed these approximately on the floor. That'll do. Then some wood ash. Maybe a couple of these. Couple of those. Now I'm also going to cheat and enrich his mixture a little bit with some organic poultry here. That's just one scoop of that. Or no, I'll add another one. I think I'll add another one. Two. Right, so mix this up. Give that a stir from the bottom. Now, in order to get this to stay on the top of the pot, what I'm going to do is add some liquid and mix it up into a paste. And I'm going to apply it almost like with a builder's trowel onto the top of the pot. And the liquid I'm going to use is liquid that's been sitting in a barrel for about a year, well, since last year really. And what that is comfrey leaves and nettles shoved in a barrel and filled with water, and it makes quite a good liquid fertilizer, but it stinks to high heaven. That's the only problem with it. So I wouldn't do it if you're having visitors, put it that way. Although you could just make a paste with water, I suppose, but the comfrey liquid feed gets things off to a good start.